Mitch McConnell recently blocked 2 election security bills from being voted on in the Senate and took to the Senate floor to explain.
Facts are that this administration has made huge strides on election security and are vigilant and proactive as we head into 2020.
But can we trust this administration to defend our elections when our president stood on a stage with the person that attacked America and said,
Putin, he just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
And told George Stephanopoulos,
So if Russia offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think you might want to listen.
Do you want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it.
call Senator McConnell and tell him America is relying on you to let Congress do its job and secure our elections.
That ad, it's from a Republican group that is fed up with the inaction when it comes to our election security. Everyone from Robert Mueller to the U.S. intelligence agencies, they all confirm the Russians hacked our last election and they're still doing it. And my next guest says this is a huge concern. Larry Norden, he's the director of the Brennan Center's election reform program. And Larry, before we talk about some of the gridlock in Washington, some of the things that need to be done, let's try and scare the audience a little bit. Let's go, it's November 4th, 2020. It's the day after the election. Give an idea of some very realistic possible headlines people could wake up to about what happened the day before Election Day.
Well, probably for election officials running elections, they say the election administrator's prayer is to not have a close election. And we know this from past experience. If there's a close election, everything that could possibly go wrong on election day comes under the magnifying glass. So I will say, as in the past, I'd be very concerned about long lines, if machines break down, if there are problems with voter registration rolls, databases, electronic poll books where people are showing up to the polls and told that they're not entitled to vote when they should have been. Those kinds of things in a close election obviously get a lot of attention because they could have an impact on potentially changing the outcome of the results, and that could shake voter confidence. And so we're always concerned about these things, but in a time when we are particularly concerned about foreign powers attacking our elections and cyber attacks against our elections, those specific things we should be particularly concerned about and paying attention to. Those are legitimate things that to be concerned about ahead of time, but there's a lot that we could do prior to election time so that if there are problems with voting machines, if there are problems with registration databases, if there are problems with election night reporting, right, that's when we get the unofficial totals, we're able to recover. And that's, I think, the work that the Brennan Center and other folks who are working on election administration have to do, preparation that we have to do ahead of election day.
And I just want everyone to put in context what Larry's saying now. Think for a moment, Donald Trump loses a close election, or that there's 3 or 4 states that were pivotal, that were within the margin of error, if you will. Do you really see, at least the president we've seen for the past 3 years, conceding without being causing maybe a major problem as to the equity of the election if he was on the short end of it? Just think about that scenario. Now, to that end, Larry, give an idea the kind of things we heard in clear detail, FBI director and Mueller report, that Russia is completely, not only did they hack and interfere with our elections in 2016, but they're doing it as we speak, and they have full intention to do it, plus apparently the capability, more than just the will, of impacting 2020. Talk about the kind of targets that they're going to go after. I know you mentioned a few of them, but give an idea to the general public. Where are our vulnerabilities right now that Russia or other foreign operators might want to mess with?
I think when we're talking about foreign interference in our elections, foreign attacks on our elections, it's important to break that down a little bit. There's social media, propaganda, disinformation, and we have seen that not just from Russia, frankly, but there have been intelligence reports that say we've seen that from Iran and to some extent China in past elections. I think we're going to see that again in 2020 for sure. So there'll be divisive messages, and there also may be messages and we did see this in 2016, that are meant to undermine the confidence in the election itself. You can't trust the election results. And there will be attacks on campaigns potentially, and information leaked that come from those campaigns. We saw that in 2016 too. But in addition to that, we might actually see attacks against the election infrastructure, the infrastructure on which we actually cast votes. I mentioned registration databases that list who can vote, election websites that tell us where and when to vote, and the election night reporting, which is the unofficial results that we get on election night. And attacks on any of those things could have an impact on, and we know that the Russians at least did probing of all of these things. Attacks on any of those things could have a big impact on people's confidence in the elections, and could actually have an impact if we're not prepared on people's ability to vote and our ability to know who won on election night.
You know, you would think that election security would be a nonpartisan issue. And I know that states have their own responsibilities here, but the feds, and specifically Congress, they certainly play a role. I got to tell you, and as jaded as I am, Larry, the two pieces of legislation that McConnell won't even let get to the floor on this. One, his colleague in a frequent guest of this program, Senator Blumenthal, said, let's basically pass legislation that if any foreign power reaches out to any campaign, they're required by law to come forward on this. That can't get a floor vote. But then the other measure that passed the House that said, we got to use paper ballots here. We have to be able to have an organized audit, I guess, post-fact, as well as a couple other, I think, pretty logical safeguards. It can't even get to the floor of Congress for a vote, and McConnell said those things are partisan. Again, I know everybody brings their own baggage to the table, but how are those things partisan? I don't get it.
Well, I agree with you that there definitely needs to be some movement in Congress to help out this. We're leaving the states and particularly local election jurisdictions on the front lines of defending our elections. I think Congress has not only a right to do something, but a responsibility to do something to protect our elections. The good news, if there is any, is that there was a bipartisan report from the Senate Intelligence Committee identifying the threats that we're facing and making some recommendations to secure our elections. It's frustrating that nothing has moved so far through the Senate. However, the House did pass an appropriations bill that will provide about $600 million to the states to help secure elections ahead of 2020. I think that can make a real difference. It could do some of the things that you mentioned, like allow states to replace paperless machines with machines that had paper backups, and everybody that has studied this issue has said that that's like a critical thing that should be done urgently. The Senate Intelligence Committee said that themselves. And that's one area where Senator McConnell can't just block things. The Senate and the House have to negotiate a final budget deal. And I do think that I'm hopeful that's somewhere where we can get some bipartisan action and actually see ahead of 2020 a little bit more assistance for making sure that we have more secure elections in 2020.
And hopefully a little bit more urgency. Finally, Larry, people should be really concerned about a real hot mess that we could have on our hands next November. I'm not overstating things that people like you that follow this much closer than me, you don't see enough hair on fire coming out of Washington, do you?
No, for sure. I do think that we need more action, especially from Congress in the next couple of months. I'd say that the glimmer of good news is that we do still have about a year and 4 or 5 months before the November 2020 election. And that is a fair amount of time if we have the resources to make sure that we're prepared for attacks that Robert Mueller and frankly, all of the intelligence agencies in this administration are telling us are going to be coming.
Larry Norden, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, we're going to shift gears in a major way. And we're going to take a look at the Manson murders. Believe it or not, it's exactly 50 years to the day that horrific crime happened. An LA Times reporter joins us to discuss why Manson continues to fascinate the American public even a half century later.